Good evening, and welcome to the talk show, episode number 2. In light of the tensions that we're all feeling and facing, we thought we'd add a few words of introduction before we begin tonight's show. Imagine your teenage daughter comes home and says, "I've decided to have my right arm amputated and donated to medical research." You might say, "We need to talk." Right now, as passionate as we all feel about the vote that we cast, there's another 50% of the country that voted the other way. Even if we talk about the Jewish community, there's at least 1 out of every 3 that voted not like we did. And we maybe feel so surprised and shocked with disbelief. How could they hold that way? How could they even think that that party should take office? What should our response be? We need to talk. And that's what Clean Speech Colorado is all about, facilitating and helping to have successful, civil, respectful conversations to find out what they're thinking and to be able to converse without denigration and without maligning one another. It could be that it's premature, could be those conversations will have to wait, could be we have to let our own passionate emotions and opinions just to settle down until it's the right time. But either way, that's our goal. And we hope that you find the lessons meaningful and that you'll dig into the campaign and we'll all be blessed with a peaceful resolution of all these tensions. Thanks for joining us. Now on to the show. Good evening, everyone. I'm Raphael Leban. Welcome back to the talk show. Tonight on our show, we're gonna cut. Let's do that again. Can we edit that? What? It's live? It's like real life. In real life, a lot of times you'd like to have the ability to edit what you said, to cut it, to redo it. You said something maybe hurtful, something insensitive, and you want to just take it back, and you can't. What we need is to be more thoughtful, to be more mindful, to be more prepared to speak to the people in our world in the best possible way. And for that, we brought you Clean Speech Colorado. Clean Speech Colorado is a community-wide education and awareness campaign to unite us in the practice of Jewish mindful speech, to build a more positive, respectful, and peaceful world. Before I welcome our fantastic hosts and special guest of tonight's show, I need to thank our tremendous team of dedicated individuals that have spent months bringing this campaign to homes across Colorado. Way to go, Team CSC. And thank you for watching the talk show tonight. We have a terrific lineup of talented guests and interesting personalities joining us from all over the world. Tonight, we'll be joined by local clean speech champions, Andrea, Hyatt, and Noah Kutnick. We'll hear another remarkable story from Sal Litvak, the accidental Talmudist from LA. We'll be treated to some more beat poetry by Chaya Lester from Jerusalem. And we'll meet tonight's special guest, Newsweek opinion editor Josh Hammer, recently moved to Denver, who will be interviewed by our host of the talk show, Adrian Gold Davis from Toronto. If you haven't already done so, take a moment and sign up for the Clean Speech Colorado campaign right here on cleanspeechcolorado.org. Now I'm happy to welcome to the show my dear friend and local clean speech champion, Andrea Hyatt.
Clean Speech Colorado's topic this year, Onas Devarim, couldn't be more timely and significant. I want to extend a special thank you to Rabbi Raphael Leban for his visionary leadership that is responsible for bringing a new consciousness to our community by highlighting this year's theme of Onas Devarim, which focuses on the price of words and how we speak to each other. Given the myriad of challenging and contentious issues everyone has been dealing with during 2020, and the rise in tensions, anxiety, concern, and fear that has resulted, there has been a breakdown in how people have been speaking to one another. Families and friendships have been fractured, and in some cases totally shattered over a myriad of hot issues. Clean Speech Colorado's goal is to elevate our speech by having us consider the words we utter that may cause pain or suffering to another. Words can hurt and words can heal. When God created the world, he did so through words. When we speak, we create a divine reality. Judaism places the highest value on the laws of speech. What comes out of our mouths has long-lasting repercussions if we are not mindful of the words we choose. On a personal level, I prefer and strive for words of kindness, consideration, and connectedness. Admittedly, this has been a challenging time for me as well, to keep from responding negatively to those who choose to confront me on issues we strongly disagree. I highly value my relationships, and while I too have strong opinions, I choose to not engage in polarizing conversations that I know will only result in negative outcomes. For me, the friendships of the heart are the heart of the matter and have far greater significance in my life than the discourse of this controversial moment in time. Words are like feathers that, when scattered, are extremely difficult to retrieve. We are all accountable for how we speak to one another. It is imperative that we find ways to disagree without the use of harsh and denigrating words, lest our differences tear us apart. We are better than that. I want to leave you with this thought that I learned from the Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation when they talked about the tongue being so powerful that Hashem gave us two gates to guard it, our teeth and our lips. It must be God felt we needed a third gate, so he gave us masks as a result of the coronavirus. It is no coincidence that God gave us a pandemic that causes us to cover our mouths. Something to seriously think about when considering the impact of our words on each other. Thank you and blessings all. I'm Andrea Hyatt, and I'm keeping it clean.
Thank you so much for those beautiful words, Andrea. Now, please welcome back to the show, Chaya Lester from Jerusalem with some clean speech beat poetry.
It would be a sin of omission not to mention the divinely given superpower that is human speech. Just look at the Torah's vision of Genesis. It's like some sci-fi nonfiction depiction of divine diction where God steps up with great conviction and simply speaks the cosmos into being, launches his timeless soliloquy of "Let there be light." And look, here we sit drenched in all of this exquisite shimmer, all of it delivered via this very particular divine vernacular, the spectacular technique of speech. We too make reality via this highly advanced spiritual technology where lips, tongues, and deepest intentions all meet. It's so ubiquitous we hardly notice this, but it's sculpting every inch of our days. We're basically magicians casting spells with the sentences we spell. We've magic wands inside of our tongues, just waiting to illuminate the world's most darkened streets. When God said, "Let there be light," he also meant the light that we will cast with our speech. So it's no common suggestion when the Torah teaches us to guard our expression, for each mouthful is powerful. Human speech is God's greatest masterpiece. It's a divine manual for making the world more grand, more regal, more legal, more just, more moral, all via oral engineering of the world we are speaking, of the world we are hearing. This is our inheritance, our highest artistry. So let's get started honestly. Let there be light. It's our birthright to rectify the wreck of this reality. Fellow co-creators, tell me, what is your timeless soliloquy? What is your prose? What is your poetry? Together, let us ignite each other's dormant scorch of dreams. Together, let us make a new world with the words we sing. I'm Chaya Lester. See you next time.
Thank you, Chaya. Taking us now from beat poetry in Jerusalem to stardom in LA, joining us on the show now, Sal Litvak with a remarkable story.
In the late 1700s, there were two Hasidic rebbes who were very good friends, but could not be more different in character and personality. Reb Baruch of Medjugorje was a very regal rebbe. His Shabbos table was like a table for a king that princes and princesses would dine at. The finest of everything, china, glasses, wine, crystal. And his manner was stately. His good friend, Reb Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, known as a great advocate of the Jewish people who would argue literally in heaven on behalf of the Jews that they should receive a good decree in the coming year. His manner was just wild. I mean, at his Shabbos table, he was known to suddenly get up and in his enthusiasm, his love of Hashem and the Jewish people, he would literally jump up on his Shabbos table, jump up and dance around and stomp. And you never knew what was going to happen or what kind of food would go flying. Now, he knew that he was very different than his good friend Reb Baruch, but he wanted to experience Shabbos by Reb Baruch in Medjugorje. Reb Baruch, in fact, was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. And Levi Yitzchak wanted to experience Shabbos by him. And he kept asking, can I come by you? Can I come by you? Rebbes rarely had Shabbos together. It's almost like a movie only has one director, and directors don't get to watch other directors' work very often. But Levi Yitzchak kept asking, and finally Reb Baruch said, fine, come by and spend Shabbos with us. But you have to understand, your way of doing things is not like our way of doing things. If you come by us, you got to do it our way. Levi Yitzchak says, I understand perfectly. I know I get carried away. When I come by you, don't ask me to lead any prayers or say any blessings. I'll keep my mouth shut. I'll just say amen when you make a blessing. And if I keep my mouth shut, everything should be fine. I won't lose it, as it were. And that's just what happened. Levi Yitzchak came over to Medjugorje. He joined in the Friday night prayers. He came by the Shabbos table. And that time, the Rebbes would typically, and especially Reb Baruch, would wear his prayer shawl at the Shabbos table. Everything done in the stateliest fashion. Levi Yitzchak just off to the side, keeping his mouth shut, enjoying himself, but observing and not wanting to be the center of attention at all. Everyone knew what Levi Yitzchak was like and was wondering, is he really going to be able to keep a lid on his ebullience all evening? And he did. Now, one of the deepest questions in Hasidic Judaism is, when you have the fish by the Friday night dinner, are you going to have the sweet fish before the sour fish to strengthen yourself before you have the more difficult fish? Or do you have the sour fish first so that you can finish with the sweet fish before you go on to the meat course? And Reb Baruch, of course, with such a regal Shabbos table that he kept, he would have a young disciple walk around with both kinds of fish on a tray and say to them, have your preference, have whichever one first that you would like. Well, this young fellow didn't know what was coming when he walked up to Levi Yitzchak and he said, Rebbe, do you like sweet fish? Now, this is the first time somebody had spoken directly to Levi Yitzchak since he had arrived in Medjugorje. Most people knew what was going on, not the young fellow. And Levi Yitzchak said, do I like sweet fish? I love sweet fish. I love everything that Hashem makes because I love Hashem. When his arms flew up in the air like this, they flew through the tray of fish. And now in slow motion, my friends, watch the tray flipping up through the air and all the fishy goop around the pieces of fish flying through the air in slow motion, and a big chunk of fish swathed in fishy goop landing right on the prayer shawl of the regal Reb Baruch at the head of the table. All faces around the table, jaws dropping, aghast. How would Reb Baruch react? Reb Baruch had been in the middle of a conversation with his neighbor about some point of Torah law. The fish lands on his shoulder, and he did this. So as I was saying, when we go to the Erev at that point, as if nothing had happened. And everybody got the message. We're not going to humiliate Levi Yitzchak. We're not going to embarrass him that he has made a mess and that everyone is looking at it. Taking their cue from Reb Baruch, everyone just went on as before as if nothing had happened. And the moment went by quietly and Levi Yitzchak was not embarrassed at all. But that was not the end of the story. Levi Yitzchak went back to Berdichev and went about his business. The following week, Reb Baruch came to a Shabbos table wearing the same prayer shawl, and it had not been cleaned. The big fishy goop stain was still there, completely out of character in that setting. The following week and the week after and the week after that, same prayer shawl, same uncleaned stain. Finally, one of his disciples said, Rabbi, it seems odd that you're not getting the tallis cleaned. Why are you keeping that stain there? And Reb Baruch says, this stain was caused by the love of a Jew for our Father in heaven. I'm never going to wash that stain. And he didn't. He eventually died 1811. That tallis got passed down to the next Rebbe and the next Rebbe and the next Rebbe. And they would use it at Shabbos only. And eventually it got so threadbare that it was only used once a year in Nila, the final service of Yom Kippur. It was so dear throughout that entire Hasidic community throughout Ukraine. Eventually it came to the Munkacher Rebbe in the 20th century. And in his will, perhaps he saw in the 1930s what was coming, the fires of the Holocaust, because he requested to be buried in it. And so that tallis was never lost in the destruction of the Jewish community. It went into the ground with the Munkacher Rebbe. And that lesson in this story has been told over so many times, often so that we should remember, this tremendous love that Levi Yitzhak had, and that he was just overflowing with that love of God and the Jewish people and Judaism. But in that story is always that refined speech of Reb Baruch, who would not for the life of him embarrass his dear friend, although such a different personality, he would never embarrass Levi Yitzhak in front of others. And so may we be inspired not only to feel and express such a great love in our spirituality, but also to refine our speech as we're dealing with the tough moments that others are having around us. I'm Sal Litvak, and if you'd like to hear more stories and Jewish wisdom from me, please visit me at accidentaltalmudist.org and on Facebook at Accidental Talmudist.
It's time now for the main segment of tonight's show, our interview with special guest Josh Hammer. Josh is an opinion editor for Newsweek magazine, and his job is to bring together multiple opinions, attitudes, and points of view into one publication. It's perfect for Clean Speech Colorado. In this campaign, which reaches across lots of political and affiliation lines, to gather and to bring together people of all perspectives and attitudes, we need to learn to focus on hearing one another respectfully, listening, accepting the fact that not everybody thinks like us, and be able to handle discourse, dialogue, and conversation with respect and with peace. And so for that, we have tonight's interview and all the interviews going forward on the talk show. I'm happy to welcome back to the show my co-host Adrienne Gold-Davis to interview Josh Hammer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clean Speech campaign. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold-Davis, and I'm so looking forward to exploring these fundamental principles in creating peaceful, respectful relationships. Judaism has an extraordinarily high standard when it comes to how we speak. Our tradition teaches us that the world was actually created with speech, and that words matter, and that words can both hurt and heal. And in these divisive times, we know it's incumbent on all of us to work on that gift of decent communication. We need to recognize the power that is literally on our tongues. We've got to be careful of our language, both verbal and body language, so as not to destroy the lives, the feelings, and the dignity of our fellow. And this applies also, even especially, with those that we disagree with. It's very interesting to me that while we all want to be ourselves in our home, we just want to go home and be ourselves, we forget that the self that we need to be is our best self. So we say and we can do hurtful and insensitive things inside of our homes under the guise of just being myself, or I don't have to pretend here. But we have it utterly backwards. You see, the feelings of those who really matter to us are in fact as or more important than those of the stranger that we might meet in the outside space. Are also prohibited from causing embarrassment or humiliation or fear in our fellow, which means that if you can't speak your piece without damaging someone else's dignity, then we are meant to not speak at all. The Hebrew words for evil speech and for hurtful words are respectively lashon hara and ones devarim. And our tradition stresses how far we must stay from this kind of speech. So over the coming weeks, we're going to interview thought leaders, celebrities, and educators who understands what it feels like to be on the receiving end of hurtful words and who may have inadvertently caused hurt themselves. You see, when we make things personal rather than just ideological, we're so much more aware of feelings and therefore are more careful. So we hope to get plenty personal with our guests. So today's guest is Mr. Josh Hammer. Josh is opinion editor of Newsweek, a research fellow with the Edmund Burke Foundation, of counsel at First Liberty Institute, and a syndicated columnist through Creators. He's a frequent pundit and essayist on political, legal, and cultural issues. Josh is a constitutional attorney by training. Welcome. Josh, it's an honor to have you join us today. Thank you for agreeing to do this conversation together.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Honestly, I'm very grateful. You know, I spent a lot of time researching what you are, who you are, what you do, and so on. And I was struck by one of your titles. You are, for Newsweek, the opinion editor. What does that mean?
I run the Newsweek opinion section. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they have their op-ed page editors. I direct the opinion page of Newsweek. So I have 3 editors who work below me, one of whom, like me, is of a right of center persuasion, 2 of whom have left of center persuasions. And we are a fairly rare media bastion today that is genuinely trying to commit to a full spectrum, the full gamut of ideas. And I think if you go to our opinion section on any given day, you will see exactly that. We do not shy away from the hard-hitting arguments, but we also don't shy away from any specific perspective. We publish it all.
So yes, I understand that that's the formula. I just wonder how often you are perhaps accused of having an editorial bias and what it feels like when you're clearly working so hard to create a balanced environment for your work. For example, I looked up one particular website that I won't even mention the name of. It was so vile, but it really had a go at you. And I thought, my gosh, here you are in this position where you are attempting to create this clear and open-minded, full spectrum opinion piece. And they had such a go at you. I wonder, do you read those kind of things?
You know, as a friend of mine used to say, quote, never read the comments after you post an article, or in today's day and age, after I tweet, just don't read the replies. But look, I have very thick skin, okay? I wouldn't be doing what I do on a day-to-day basis if I didn't have thick skin. I was kind of always like that. I was a very natural contrarian. I mean, I remember my senior year of high school in AP government class, kind of taking on my 25 classmates, 1 versus 25 on argumentation. So I was kind of born with a contrarian streak. And I think that over time manifested itself in developing thicker skin. Do I read the various nasty things that people say about me? Sometimes. There was one instance this past August that it really kind of did get to me. The sheer volume and intensity was so high, but that is really the exception rather than the rule. I try to kind of straddle the line between confidence in my convictions without being too overly confident, because overconfidence is never a good thing. I think as a great follower of the great English or British statesman Edmund Burke, I believe in epistemological humility at the end of the day. So I try not to be overly confident, but if you have the courage of your convictions and you believe in what you stand for, then, you know, what the haters say ultimately just cannot possibly faze you.
Yes, it's absolutely true. Of course, this is the basis of Judaism, of the word ivrit, right? To be on the other side, to be able to stand up on the other side, figuratively and literally, of that river, and to be able to hold to your convictions. But I just wondered, as somebody who deals with opinions and has an editorial board, obviously, to ensure that there's a balanced spread of them, how do you differentiate between an opinion that is simply that and fact? And is there ever a time that an opinion that has no basis in fact doesn't pass your editorial board?
So these are obviously getting into gray areas, right? I mean,
Right.
we say that we're committed to a wide range, the entire gamut of viewpoints. In reality, we're obviously not going to publish any possible view under the sun. Obviously, there are some things that are so reprehensible, that are so intellectually unjustifiable, morally wretched, etc., that we will obviously never give the light of day to. But look, we in the media business and in the opinion section, in the editorial side of the media business in particular, I think all of us are collectively, individually and collectively, in the business of gatekeeping and trying to define the Overton window for what is and what is not acceptable discourse in the public sphere. Of course, when I say we publish the full spectrum, that's not actually true. We just publish a broader spectrum than most mainstream media places, I think.
That makes sense. And how often do you think that your personal emotional places of reaction, even though you are by definition, by your own definition, objective and sometimes contrarian, is there any room within your decisions for the fear of causing hurt?
There is. No, I mean, there absolutely is. My girlfriend, one thing that in our almost 2 years of dating now, she has really kind of instilled in me is to try to be a better person online, to try to elevate rather than to diminish the discourse. Twitter is a cesspool. Okay, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, as I think most people in kind of the public-facing arena do these days. It is a cesspool of ad hominem, vitriolic, personalized dunking, of trying to own people. A lot of kind of low-level, kind of retrograde discourse occurs on that most wretched of social media platforms. But what I try very conscientiously to avoid any kind of ad hominem slurs, any kind of ad hominem personal attacks. I am perfectly fine criticizing, indeed robustly criticizing, ideas, theories, principles, policies, etc. But I really conscientiously strive to avoid direct personal confrontation. And, in particular, as a Jewish conservative, I've been frustrated for a very long time with how many of my American co-religionists act in the political realm, with how they vote. And sometimes in my lesser moments that I'm not proud of, that's kind of manifested itself in some harsh words for some of my co-religionists. But I remember I moved to Denver, Colorado from Dallas, Texas. And my dear friend, the in-town Chabad Rebbe that I studied Mishnah Torah with, we learned a little Rambam together. We learned a halakha one time that where the Rambam quite clearly says that you essentially do not publicly call out your fellow Jews. And Rabbi Tzvi Drizin, my dear friend, looks at me and he goes, "Josh, let this be a lesson to you in your daily battles on Twitter." So I really do try to take that one too. I'm not always perfect. I do slip. We all slip. But I really do take to heart the best that I can, given my fallible human nature, not infallible. I try to take to heart trying to elevate rather than to lower the discourse.
And has there ever been a time, if you can be honest and vulnerable for a minute, that something has hurt profoundly? And can you tell me what it was in the language or perhaps in the tone that managed to penetrate and to make you feel personally wounded? And how did you handle yourself?
Sure. So, I mean, I alluded to it a little earlier in our conversation, but really the only time that being a public-facing person has gotten to me was a couple months ago. We had quite a firestorm at Newsweek. I published a friend of mine. He is a brilliant lawyer, former dean of a law school in Southern California, clerked on the Supreme Court of the US himself 25, 30 years ago. He has a niche argument. It's kind of an arcane constitutional argument about birthright citizenship, without getting too deep in legal weeds, about what the meaning of the requirement to be a natural born citizen. After we clicked publish on this op-ed, the firestorm ensued. People were calling Newsweek a racist, birtherist outlet, if you recall kind of the birtherism controversy with Barack Obama in 2008. So my name was slung all over the news. I was personally called a racist in terms like I've never seen it before. But look, that I think is the only time that the sheer volume and intensity and vitriol has started to affect me. I was actually pretty depressed for a few days there. But at the end of the day, I mean, I certainly prayed over it multiple times, but you have to just develop a thicker skin. I mean, I don't really know how else to put it. If you have the courage of your convictions, if you know that what you're doing is right, and in this particular instance, again, I wasn't even writing an article. I was just exercising editorial judgment as to what was within this Overton window of acceptable opinion that we've referenced. So if you believe what you're doing is as being intellectually honest, intellectually defensible, and ultimately oriented towards, in kind of classic Aristotelian fashion, ultimately geared towards the dialectic, the iterative process to pursue truth, then you have to sleep well at night. So after a few days of kind of rolling around, in the Twitter spheres, horrible mudslinging, I ultimately was able to get over it. But that was a tough episode.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about Maimonides earlier, about what the Ramban said. And it occurs to me that he also spoke a lot about that golden middle path, right? Not too far this way, not too
Yeah,
far that
right.
way. And I'm imagining that as somebody who covers so much political commentary, and you've already referenced that yourself, how do you take that to heart? And that's A of it. And the B of it is, when you consider the pain that you can feel after being dragged into the mud, did that experience make you more mindful of what you were willing to put out there?
Well, I'll take the latter first, I guess. Yeah, I mean, the reality is I don't run my own website. I mean, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm the opinion editor. I do have bosses. I work for an editor-in-chief. I work for the CEO, the chief strategy officer. And the reality is, I can think that something is intellectually defensible. I can know that something is intellectually defensible, intellectually honest. But in a for-profit business, there are obviously going to be other factors at play as far as what you can or should not run. So yes, that was an eye-opening experience. If you go to the Newsweek website, you'll see that we continue to publish hard-hitting, aggressive commentary from, again, across the spectrum. But that specific instance was eye-opening as potentially Overton window pushing, I guess you might say. On the Rambam Golden Path point, which is I'm really happy you raised that because I remember so vividly actually learning that with Rabbi Drizzen back in Dallas. It's kind of one of my fondest memories actually of the Rambam that I learned with him. I don't conscientiously think about this on a day-to-day basis, but now that I kind of think about it in real time with you, I think it does play a role in kind of how I think about the world. I mentioned Edmund Burke earlier. Part of my personal whole political philosophy and my conservative worldview, Burke's most famous work, Reflections on the Revolution in France, was kind of a rally cry against what he thought was the fanciful nature and ultimately the very dangerous ends of rationalist abstraction, of trying to think in grand dogmatic theoretical terms and kind of seeing where that would lead. From Burke's vantage point, of course, that led to Robespierre and the guillotine and all sorts of anarchic mayhem. So my conservatism is very much in line with that, is kind of rejecting kind of the extremities of people who would kind of take to their theoretical underpinnings to the streets and try to violently implement that. I try to kind of have a more humble, a more subdued form of politics that recognizes, again, the fallible nature of man, the limits of human knowledge, the limits of empiricism and rationalism to arrive at lowercase t truths, as opposed, of course, to capital T truths of scripture. So yeah, I do think that there is a certain kind of Burkean humility that is, I think, kind of analogous to this Rambam Golden Path.
How do we lower the volume around the ethical idea that not everything we think has to be said, and that an opinion does not always have to be articulated if it's hurtful in the interpersonal sphere?
Well, I mean, how to do so? I mean, that's a difficult question, obviously, but I mean, it ultimately all comes back to trying to rear children and raise children with a basic sense of decorum, decency, and kind of civic efficacy and respect for diversity of opinions. I mean, it all kind of comes back to the home, obviously. I mean, my mother, I come from a lot of teachers. My mom is an elementary school teacher. Her mom, my grandma, was a special ed teacher, and her mom, my great grandmother, who I never met, was also a teacher. So I've always kind of believed in the formative power of education to shape hearts and minds, and essentially to raise, to raise a generation of citizens according to classical ideals, national ideals, whatever kind of metric you want to define it as. And obviously that's part of the equation, but part of it is the home as well.
So I'm going to ask you to project ahead, God willing, when you're a father. How much media will you allow your children to have?
I believe in theory in strict parental filters. So I plan to aggressively monitor that a lot. I am somewhat shocked at the age that I see children getting cell phones these days, being on Facebook, playing violent video games online. It's pretty horrifying. So I definitely plan to be a little stricter, I think, than a lot of people and my fellow millennials, a lot of people in my generation when it comes to parenting in general, I would say.
You know what thrills me the most about Jewish practice and Jewish philosophy is that we were talking about these things long before 2020, that we understood that the human condition is such that without proper checks and balances, we cause so much damage with the things that we say and the way that we say them, and that it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that we're not part of the problem. And I imagine it's a very difficult line that you walk as an editor, as a legal mind, and as a human being. And I wish you tremendous success in walking that line, that golden mean, that middle path, and living your truth without tipping too far one way or the other, and being careful that we don't defame anyone. Yeah, go ahead.
That's very kind of you, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
So I really want to thank Josh so much for this conversation, this rich dialogue. And now, back to the studio.
Now it's time for the Mr. Wordwise portion of the show, and we're happy to have as today's Wordwise kid guest, Noah Kutnick.
It means that you want something someone else has. I guess when all my friends had iPads and computers and I just had a Kindle, they'd always be able to do things I couldn't. Annoyed that you don't have that, and they do. Mad, sad, left out. Sometimes my stomach hurts or my head does, because then it kind of feels awkward when everyone's talking about it and you're just sitting there not knowing what they're talking about. Think about what you do have and what you have special instead of what they have special and you don't. I could tell them and encourage them that what they have is good too. I'm Noah and I'm keeping it clean.
Thanks for joining us tonight on the second episode of The Talk Show. For the next 2 Sundays at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we'll be back with more local heroes, talented artists, and special guests. Today is day 8 of Clean Speech Colorado. If you haven't already done so, sign up here at cleanspeechcolorado.org to receive the daily video lessons. In the second week, we'll share many examples of common situations where onas devarim occurs and how to prevent it. When we become more familiar with these challenging speech moments, we'll be that much more prepared to handle them successfully. Sign up now to learn more. I'm Rabbi Leban. This is The Talk Show. We'll see you next week.